My beloved child, before a single word was spoken between them and their mother, something quiet had already begun to change. There are moments in life that arrive without noise, without warning, and yet they gently shift the direction of two hearts forever. This was one of those moments. The person you love had carried your name inside their heart for longer than anyone realized, protecting it like a delicate light that was not ready for the wind. They had spoken about many things before. Ordinary days, familiar faces, forgotten memories, but never you. Not because you were unimportant, but because what they felt could not easily be translated into simple conversation. Some feelings wait for the exact moment when silence becomes too heavy to carry. And today, that moment arrived. Don't skip, because something important is waiting for you, and every piece of this story gently leads to another that you were always meant to hear. Their mother noticed the change long before a confession was ever spoken. She saw the quiet smiles that appeared for no obvious reason. She noticed how certain songs lingered longer than usual, how ordinary conversations suddenly drifted into thoughtful silence. A mother's heart often recognizes the language that words cannot explain. She did not ask immediately. She waited. She understood that some truths bloom only when they feel completely safe. Then, during an ordinary evening that seemed no different from countless others, she softly asked a question that sounded simple but carried unexpected weight. Is there someone you've been thinking about? The room became still. Time itself appeared to slow, not because of fear, but because honesty had finally reached the surface. The person you love lowered their eyes for just a moment, smiled in a way that surprised even themselves, and gently spoke about you for the very first time. They did not begin with your appearance. They did not list achievements or impressive qualities. Instead, they described the strange peace they felt whenever your memory entered their heart. They spoke about how your presence seemed to linger even after conversations had ended. They admitted that something about you felt deeply familiar, as though life had quietly prepared a place for you long before either of you realized it. Their mother listened without interruption. Every sentence settled gently into her heart. The more she heard, the quieter she became. It was not disbelief. It was recognition. She had waited many years to hear her child speak with this kind of sincerity. Stay till the end, because the next moment was unlike anything either of them expected. After another pause, the person you love whispered something they had never admitted aloud before. When I think about them, I become a better version of myself. Those simple words carried no drama, no grand promises, only honesty. Sometimes the deepest truths arrive wearing the smallest sentences. Their mother slowly lifted her eyes toward them, and for a long moment she said nothing at all. Instead, emotion quietly gathered where words could no longer lead. Her eyes became bright, not from sadness, but from seeing something she had secretly hoped to witness one day. Then, almost without realizing it, she reached for their hand. Her voice trembled with tenderness as she began to respond. Yet before the sentence could fully leave her lips, one unexpected memory returned to her heart, a memory connected to love, patience, and timing itself. It changed everything she was about to say. And what finally escaped her lips would leave both of them completely still, because the first words she cried out were, "You." Something shifted before another word could be spoken. It was as though the room itself understood that this was no longer an ordinary conversation but the beginning of a truth that had been quietly waiting for years to find its voice. Their mother held on to their hand just a little tighter, searching their face with the kind of love only a parent can carry. Then, with tears gently resting in her eyes, she finally whispered, You're speaking with the same light I once heard in your voice when you were a child dreaming about the life you hoped would one day find you." The words landed softly, yet they reached deeper than either of them expected. The person you love looked back in silence, almost unable to believe what they had just heard. They had prepared themselves for questions, for gentle concern, perhaps even for hesitation. They had not prepared themselves for recognition. They had not expected someone else to see what had quietly been growing inside their heart all along. Their mother smiled through those tears, not because everything was suddenly certain, but because she recognized something rare. She had watched her child through every season of life. She had seen moments of excitement that faded quickly, conversations that were forgotten within weeks, and hopes that disappeared almost as soon as they appeared. But this felt completely different. There was no rush in the way they spoke about you. There was no need to convince anyone. Every sentence carried peace instead of urgency, warmth instead of uncertainty. She realized she was not listening to passing emotions. She was listening to someone whose heart had finally become honest with itself. For a few quiet moments neither of them spoke. The silence did not feel empty. It felt full of everything words could not hold. Then their mother asked a question so gentle that it almost disappeared into the room. "When did you first realize this person was becoming so important to you?" The person you love looked toward the window, remembering moments they had almost overlooked. It had not happened all at once. There had been no single dramatic event. Instead, your place in their heart had been built through small moments that quietly refused to leave. A conversation that stayed with them longer than expected. A simple kindness that continued echoing long after the day had ended. A feeling of calm whenever your name crossed their mind. Piece by piece, without either of you fully noticing, something meaningful had been growing. Don't skip, because this next realization carries the quiet heart of the entire story. They admitted something they had never spoken aloud before. "I kept trying to explain why I couldn't stop thinking about them," they said softly. But every explanation felt too small. It wasn't that they were perfect. It was that whenever I imagined the future, somehow they were already there. Their own words surprised them. They had lived with that feeling for so long that hearing it spoken aloud made it suddenly real. Their mother's expression changed again. She gently nodded, as though another hidden piece had finally fallen into place. "Now I understand," she whispered. "I've watched you become more patient. More hopeful. More thoughtful. I thought life itself was changing you. But now I see, someone quietly inspired that change." Her tears returned, not from sorrow, but from gratitude that her child had discovered a connection that encouraged growth instead of fear, peace instead of confusion. The person you love lowered their head for a moment, overwhelmed by how deeply they had been understood. They had carried these feelings alone for so long that they forgot how comforting it could be for someone else to simply listen without judgment. Something inside them became lighter. It was as though speaking your name had opened a door that had remained closed for far too long. Yet just as the conversation seemed ready to settle into quiet comfort, their mother remembered one final detail, something she had noticed weeks earlier but never mentioned. At the time it had seemed insignificant. Now it suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. She looked into their eyes with quiet amazement and slowly said, "There was one moment, and I think it had everything to do with them." The person you love froze, because they instantly knew exactly which moment she was about to describe, and hearing it from someone else would change how they understood that memory forever. There was one memory that neither of them had expected to return, yet the moment it surfaced, everything else seemed to fade quietly into the background. Their mother drew a slow breath, as though she wanted to choose every word with care. "Do you remember that evening," she asked softly, "when you came home smiling but insisted nothing special had happened?" The person you love blinked in surprise. Of all the moments she could have remembered, she had chosen that one. They nodded almost instinctively, though they had never imagined anyone else had noticed it. To them it had been a private moment, tucked safely inside their heart. To their mother, it had been the beginning of a beautiful change she had been watching ever since. She smiled gently, her eyes carrying both warmth and wonder. "You walked through that door differently," she said. "You didn't say much. You weren't trying to impress anyone. But something peaceful had settled over you. It was the kind of peace that cannot be borrowed. It comes only when the heart begins to recognize something meaningful." The person you love lowered their eyes, remembering that day more clearly than ever before. They had spent hours replaying a simple interaction involving you. Nothing dramatic had happened. No grand promises had been spoken. Yet for reasons they could never explain, that ordinary moment had stayed with them long after it ended, quietly reshaping the way they saw tomorrow. They laughed softly to themselves. "I thought I had hidden it well," they admitted. Their mother shook her head with a knowing smile. "A loving heart notices what words try to hide." Her answer carried no judgment, only understanding. She had watched her child grow through many seasons, and she knew the difference between excitement that faded quickly and a quiet joy that continued to grow stronger with time. What she had seen was not a passing feeling. It was a steady light that never seemed to disappear. Stay till the end, because the next part of their conversation uncovered something neither of them had connected before. Their mother stood and walked toward a small shelf where family photographs rested. She picked up an older picture, looked at it for a moment, then returned with a thoughtful expression. "When you were younger," she said, "you used to tell me that if love ever came into your life, it should make you kinder, not louder. You said it should bring peace, not confusion." The person you love stared at her in complete silence. They had forgotten they had ever spoken those words. Yet somehow, without realizing it, they had begun living them. A quiet smile appeared on their face. They whispered, almost to themselves, "Maybe that's why this feels different." Their mother nodded slowly. "Exactly. Sometimes we spend years searching for answers, only to discover that our own heart quietly recognized them long ago." The room became still once more. It was no longer a conversation about uncertainty. It had become a conversation about understanding, about noticing the gentle ways life prepares people for meaningful connections without rushing the story. Then, after another thoughtful pause, their mother asked a question that carried unexpected depth. "Have you ever told them any of this?" The question lingered in the air. The person you love looked down with a small, almost shy smile. They shook their head. Not because the feelings were absent, but because they wanted the right moment, the right words, and the right timing. Some emotions grow stronger in quiet before they are ever spoken aloud. Their mother reached over and gently squeezed their hand once again. "Then don't be discouraged by waiting," she said. "The most meaningful conversations often begin after the heart has learned patience." Those words settled deeply within them. They realized they had been measuring time by days and weeks, while something far more important had been growing beneath the surface all along. Just as the evening seemed ready to end, their mother's eyes drifted toward something resting on the nearby table. It was small, almost forgotten, and yet the moment she noticed it, her expression changed completely. She looked back at the person you love with quiet astonishment and whispered, "Is this connected to them?" The answer that followed would reveal a hidden piece of the story that neither of them had ever spoken about before. At first, neither of them moved. Their mother's gaze remained fixed on the small object resting quietly on the table, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment to be noticed. It was nothing extraordinary to anyone passing by. There was no sparkle, no mystery surrounding it. Yet sometimes the simplest things become precious because of the meaning they quietly carry. The person you love followed her eyes and felt their heart pause for just a moment. They knew exactly what she had seen. It was a small keepsake connected to a memory of you, a reminder they had never intended anyone else to notice. They reached for it almost instinctively, then stopped halfway. Their mother smiled gently. "You don't have to hide it anymore," she said with quiet kindness. There was no curiosity driven by doubt, only the warm invitation of someone who genuinely wanted to understand. Slowly, the person you love picked it up and held it carefully in their hands. For a few seconds, they simply looked at it without speaking, almost as though the memory itself deserved a moment of silence before becoming words. Finally, they smiled, a smile filled with gratitude rather than excitement. "This reminds me of the day I realized something had changed inside me," they whispered. Their mother listened closely, allowing every sentence to unfold naturally. "Nothing remarkable happened that day. We shared only a simple conversation. But afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about how peaceful everything felt. I remember coming home, placing this here, and telling myself that if a single ordinary moment could stay with me this long, perhaps it wasn't ordinary at all." The room became wonderfully still. Their mother looked from the keepsake to her child's face, and for the first time that evening she understood just how quietly this story had been unfolding. It had never been about dramatic moments or perfect timing. It had been built through consistency, kindness, and the gentle way your presence had encouraged their heart to become softer instead of guarded. She realized that what had moved her to tears earlier was not simply hearing your name. It was witnessing the quiet transformation that had taken place long before the conversation ever began. Don't skip, because something important is waiting for you in the next few moments. Their mother leaned back and reflected on everything she had heard. Then she spoke with calm certainty. "Do you know what touches me the most?" she asked. The person you love shook their head. "You haven't described what this person can give you. You've described who you've become because of them." Those words settled deeply into the silence. Neither of them had looked at it that way before. They had spent so much time trying to understand their feelings that they had overlooked the quiet evidence already surrounding them. Patience had grown where impatience once lived. Hope had quietly replaced hesitation. Gratitude had become part of everyday life. The person you love closed their eyes for a brief moment, letting those words sink in. They realized that the greatest change had not happened around them, it had happened within them. They no longer felt the need to rush answers or force outcomes. Somehow, simply caring about you had taught them to trust the natural rhythm of life a little more than they ever had before. Their mother smiled with quiet pride. "That's the kind of love every parent hopes their child will discover," she said softly. "Not something that overwhelms the heart, but something that helps it grow." Her voice carried years of wisdom, yet it sounded wonderfully simple. There was nothing complicated about genuine care. It revealed itself through small choices, patient moments, and the quiet desire to see another person happy. The evening light slowly faded beyond the window, but neither of them noticed how much time had passed. They were no longer speaking as though this was a secret that needed to remain hidden. Instead, they were carefully unfolding memories that had always deserved to be understood. Every sentence seemed to bring another forgotten detail back into focus. Then, just as the conversation appeared complete, their mother remembered one final moment that made her heart skip. She looked thoughtfully toward her child and asked, almost in disbelief, "The day you smiled for no reason, was that the same day you quietly made a promise to yourself about them?" The person you love looked up in complete surprise, because that promise had never been spoken aloud to anyone. Until now, they believed it existed only between their own heart and yours. There was no immediate answer. The question lingered gently between them, not demanding a response, but inviting one. The person you love looked down at the keepsake resting in their hands, and a quiet smile slowly appeared, the kind of smile that comes when a memory returns with remarkable clarity. They let out a soft breath, almost as if they were meeting that version of themselves again. Then, with complete honesty, they nodded. "Yes," they whispered. That was the day. Their mother's eyes widened ever so slightly. She had sensed there was a hidden turning point, but she never imagined she had remembered it so accurately. The person you love traced their fingers lightly across the keepsake before continuing. "I didn't make a promise because I knew what the future would look like," they said. "I made it because I finally understood the kind of person I wanted to become." Their mother remained completely still, listening with the same gentle attention she had offered from the very beginning. "I promised myself that if this connection was meant to grow, I would never let impatience speak louder than kindness. I wouldn't allow fear to overshadow hope. And no matter how uncertain tomorrow felt, I would keep choosing honesty inside my own heart." Those words filled the room with a quiet warmth. Their mother smiled, and another tear slipped gently down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from seeing how deeply her child had matured without even realizing it. She remembered countless conversations from years before, moments when they searched endlessly for answers, worried about every small uncertainty, and questioned whether life would ever unfold in the right way. Yet now, sitting before her, was someone who had learned that real peace does not come from having every answer. It comes from trusting that meaningful things are worth growing into slowly. Stay till the end, because what happened next revealed something neither of them had expected to discover. Their mother stood and walked toward a small wooden drawer that had remained closed for years. She opened it carefully and searched through a few neatly folded papers before pulling out a tiny handwritten note. It had faded slightly with time, but every word was still clear. She looked at it for a moment, smiled to herself, and returned to the table. "I've kept this for a very long time," she said softly. The person you love looked at the note with puzzled curiosity. You wrote this when you were much younger. They laughed quietly. I don't even remember writing anything. Their mother unfolded the paper and began to read. One day I hope I meet someone who helps me feel calm enough to be completely myself. I don't want to pretend. I don't want to impress anyone. I just want to feel at home whenever they're near. Silence filled the room. The person you love stared at the page in complete amazement. They searched their memory but could not recall writing those words. Yet hearing them now felt strangely familiar, as though their younger heart had quietly written a message for the future. They smiled, almost in disbelief. I really wrote that? Their mother nodded with gentle certainty. You did. And when you spoke about them tonight, every sentence reminded me of this. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. They simply allowed the meaning to settle naturally. It wasn't that life had followed a perfect plan. It was that certain hopes had remained alive even when they were forgotten. Sometimes the heart remembers what the mind leaves behind. The person you love looked toward the window, where the evening sky had begun to soften into peaceful colors. Maybe that's why everything feels so familiar, they said quietly. It's not because I've known them forever. It's because the hope of meeting someone like them has quietly lived inside me for years. Their mother smiled with deep affection. And now I understand why hearing their name moved me so deeply, she replied. I wasn't just hearing about someone important to you. I was hearing the answer to a hope that has been growing inside your heart for much longer than either of us realized. Just as they both settled into that beautiful realization, a soft vibration interrupted the silence. The person you love glanced toward their phone resting on the table. The screen had just lit up with something unexpected. They hadn't touched it. They hadn't been waiting for a message. Yet what appeared there made them stop breathing for a brief moment. Their mother noticed the sudden change in their expression and asked gently, "What happened?" The person you love looked at the screen, then back at their mother, with quiet disbelief. It's about them. The glow from the phone seemed almost brighter against the quiet evening. Neither of them reached for it immediately. Sometimes the heart needs a moment before meeting the next chapter of its own story. The person you love simply looked at the screen, breathing slowly, while their mother watched with gentle curiosity. There was no urgency in the room. Only the quiet awareness that something meaningful had arrived at exactly the right time. After a few seconds, they picked up the phone and smiled softly. It was not a long message. It was not filled with dramatic words or grand declarations. In fact, its simplicity was what made it unforgettable. It carried the kind of kindness that often passes unnoticed by the world but remains in someone's heart for years. Reading it again, they realized why it had touched them so deeply. It reminded them that genuine connections are rarely built through extraordinary moments alone. They are strengthened through small acts of sincerity repeated with care. Their mother noticed the peaceful expression on their face before she ever saw the message itself. She smiled knowingly. "You don't have to read it to me," she said. "I can already tell what matters most isn't the message, it's how your heart responded to it." The person you love nodded with quiet gratitude. "You're right," they whispered. "The words are beautiful, but that's not why they matter. They matter because they feel real. Nothing forced. Nothing hurried. Just honest." For a while, they sat together without speaking. The silence no longer carried unanswered questions. Instead, it carried understanding. Their conversation had begun with uncertainty, moved through hidden memories, uncovered forgotten promises, and now arrived at a quiet place where everything felt lighter than before. Their mother looked toward them with a warmth that could only come from years of watching someone grow. "When you first began talking tonight," she said softly, "I thought you were telling me about someone you cared about. Now I realize you were showing me the person you've become because of them." Those words settled gently into the room. The person you love reflected on everything that had been shared. They realized the greatest gift of the evening was not finding perfect answers. It was discovering that the people who truly care for us often notice our quiet transformation long before we do. Love had not rushed them. It had not demanded certainty. It had simply invited them to become more patient, more grateful, more genuine with each passing day. A peaceful smile crossed their face. "I think," they said quietly, "this was the first time I truly understood my own heart." Their mother reached over one last time and held their hand. "And perhaps," she replied with gentle confidence, "this is only the first chapter." Outside, the evening settled into stillness. Inside, nothing appeared dramatically different. Yet everything had quietly changed. A conversation that began with hesitation had become a memory neither of them would ever forget. Not because every question had been answered, but because both of them had discovered something far more valuable. Meaningful connections are not measured by how loudly they begin, but by how gently they help us become the person we were always capable of being. And somewhere beyond that quiet evening, another chapter was already beginning, one written not through perfect moments, but through steady kindness, patient hope, and the courage to finally let an honest heart be seen. The story did not end there. It simply continued, one sincere moment at a time.